Well, this is my thinking too, and maybe less in the sense of generations and more in the sense of age. I mean, when I was 20, I did not think that anything could defeat me. As you're saying, I thought I was immortal. And so, of course, maybe that's just a function of being human. You know, the brain is still going through its various developments. Yeah. Maybe it's an age and stage of life, different responsibilities, not necessarily fewer, but different kinds of responsibilities. So, of course, we should expect that there's a certain amount of not following the directives to protect one's health when it's primarily one's own health that it's expressed in the terms of. Yeah.
And yet at the same time, the whole Fridays for climate change, the students that are protesting, and I don't know what they're doing now I don't know what they were doing in spring break, and now that school's kind of postponed indefinitely. I still think to some degree they're gathering and they're finding alternative ways to gather. And I know that the folks that are part of that group, I think, are taking this social responsibility to each other very seriously and are practicing that kind of the physical distancing and the protective measures that we've been asked to take. So, and they're like us, they're feeling that, or like we were at that age. I mean, no doubt there's some sense of invincibility and invulnerability there as well, but somehow the whole kind of participation in a wider community and our responsibility to each other, and not just to each other as human beings, but to each other as the earth, has taken a much more important priority in their lives. And so I that's something to be celebrated. And I have to admit, when I was in my late teens and early 20s, I felt a sense of that as well, a responsibility. I was part of a number of kind of international organizations where we're looking at poverty and housing. And I felt that, even though I felt also at the same time that kind of invincibility as well. It was kind of an odd mix when I was in my late teens and early 20s. I don't know about you.
Yeah, humans are complex creatures.
Yes, yeah, we are.
We can both be concerned about other people and societal well-being, and also fail to take some things as seriously as we ought to. And also, if we're looking at a particular age cohort, the people who are have the confidence, shall we say, on the beaches in Florida are probably not the same people who are doing the Fridays for the Planet. Maybe they are, but they're probably different people. So when I'm making claims about a particular age group, of course, I need to be aware that there are different individuals within that group. Sure. Of course. And so it's impossible to generalize or dangerous to generalize. Yeah. But absolutely, I don't know. I'm trying to think back to how I would have responded to this in my early 20s. I'm not sure I understood the idea of public health even, or herd immunity. Certainly I hadn't become familiar with that concept yet. So, but I was concerned about other people on the planet and all that. So I wonder if it's partly a case of how it's framed and how it's communicated, and whether I would have listened to, say, a prime minister, or whether I would have listened more to a peer to whom I was more oriented than some older adult speaking at a podium with a mic.
I remember Richard Rorbot talking about Jesus and having grown up in an honor-shame world and society. And he talked about a number of passages that we take for granted, like the Beatitudes. And he said, instead of saying, blessed are, the poor in spirit, or the meek, or the grieving, or so on, and some translations have happy are, you could say honored are. And so when Jesus talked about honor shame, and in a sense, I mean, he didn't talk about it directly in the way of trying to explain what an honor shame society was, but in the kingdom of God that he was embodying, it was this sense of taking those that had been pushed to the sides as not having honor and not having worth then, and then embracing that community and making them part of his community. And so in a way, he would have been considered as having no honor by others in a community, but he was embodying God's kingdom, where all are welcome and all are honored in a way that is defined more by compassion and love. And I think that's what, as a follower of this as a follower of Jesus, I would think that's what he would be advocating for us today, that are advocating for the kingdom of love and compassion is where we then take seriously what's going on around us and honor the other and honor each other by, physical distancing and taking the precautions that have been suggested.
And it strikes me that those who would have lacked honor in those days would also have been those who are most vulnerable in the case of a pandemic.
Absolutely.
People living on the margins, people living in poverty, the sick, the grieving.
Yep.
They would have lacked honor and they would have been vulnerable.
Yep. And today, it's tough talking to people. We have the food center here at Nelson United Church, and they're down to 1 day a week, and they're trying to. They had it all set up and well organized, with circles where people would stand. They prepared bags of food for people, but very much aware of how are we serving the homeless? Where do they go? Where if they have to practice social isolation for 2 weeks, where do they go and do that? I'm not sure how well we're treating the poorest of the poor in our communities and those that are really on the margins. I know that there's some attempts as part of these emergency measures to look out for them, and it's interesting that in England and in other parts of the world, they're housing the homeless people in the unused motels and hotels. So, they've encouraged the hotels to open up, and maybe even in some places have required them to open up to people that don't have a place to go, which is quite extraordinary. Are we doing that here? I haven't heard of that yet.
I haven't heard of that either. And I'm mindful of people living in refugee camps right now, too.
Right.
I mean, there's just no chance of getting 2 meters of separation from people, right?
That's right. That's right. I was just curious as to why the honor-shame issue came up.
Well, I thought honor and shame was basically individual versus collective, and thinking that if we could think in terms of the collective honor and the collective well-being of our society, then we could rethink some of the individual practices that are putting each other at risk.
Right.
And the virus that's ripping through our communities right now is proving just how connected we are.
Yep.
And how much we depend on each other for our very health and well-being.
Yep. And
how the mistakes of a few can have repercussions throughout entire communities.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Some of the people that I read, like George Monbiot, the Guardian, just that's what he's talking about. That's some of his latest articles have been about how this has really just highlighted how connected we are, and we have to take that far more seriously. There's been certainly lots of warnings with climate change and climate disaster, and we haven't heeded those warnings, and now we're kind of forced to, and so his question is, what's going to happen when all this is over? Are we going to go back to normal, or are we going to create a new normal in which there's a sense of being far more connected? I hope it's the latter. That would certainly be, well, what I'll be talking about, is let's not step back into our individualism in our own, protecting our own families and backyards, that we need to be thinking about how we're connected, and not just as human beings, but how we're connected as a whole kind of biosphere that we call Earth.
Yeah, I imagine we're a resilient and ingenious species, so we'll find ways of connecting that keep each other safe and remind each other that we are all beloved creatures.
Exactly. Well said. Mm-hmm.
Well, thanks, David. I appreciate your wisdom, as always, and I hope to do this again sometime.
Thanks, Greg.
Well, that's some of what David and I think, but we're curious to know your response. Catch us on email at r&r@castlegarunited.ca. That's CASTLEGAR united.ca. Until next time, I'm your host, Greg Powell, hoping you are assured of our collective resilience and feeling individually restored.